There's a certain peace that comes with living in a quiet suburban neighborhood outside Atlanta. Tree-lined streets, kids riding bikes in the cul-de-sacs, folks waving from their porches on warm evenings. My wife and I moved here 25 years ago for exactly that kind of life. Our house sat on a generous lot that had been part of an older family farm long before the developers came in and carved the place into half-acre parcels. One of the reasons we bought it was the existing well, deep, reliable, and grandfathered in from the 1970s. It provided crystal-clear water, saved us a fortune on city bills, and gave us a sense of self-sufficiency that felt downright American. That all changed on a humid July morning in 2024. I stepped out back to water the tomatoes, flipped the breaker on the pump house, and heard the familiar thump-thump as it kicked to life. 30 seconds later, I heard shouting. Across the street, Margaret Harrington, our neighborhood's unofficial enforcer, was already halfway down her driveway, binoculars swinging around her neck, face flushed under her wide-brimmed sun hat. "Turn that off right now," she hollered, marching straight toward my property line like a general charging into battle. "You're stealing water that belongs to the homeowners association." I stood there with the hose in my hand, water trickling onto the grass, trying to process what I'd just heard. Stealing water? From my own well? On my own land? Margaret didn't slow down. By the time she reached my driveway, she had her clipboard out, always that clipboard, and was jabbing her finger toward the pump house. "The covenants are very clear," she declared. "All resources within the subdivision boundaries are subject to association oversight. That includes groundwater. You need to shut this down immediately and connect to city water like the rest of us. We can't have people doing whatever they want. It's not fair." Fair. That word would come up a lot over the next few months. I tried to explain, calmly, the way you do when you're talking to someone who's already made up their mind, that the well had been drilled and permitted decades before the HOA even existed. My deed mentioned it explicitly. The county records confirmed it. But Margaret wasn't interested in facts. She rolled her eyes so hard I thought she might strain something, then informed me she'd already called an emergency board meeting. If I didn't comply voluntarily, they'd issue citations, impose daily fines, and, if necessary, physically secure the well with a lock. She wasn't bluffing about influence. Her closest friend, Evelyn Whitaker, was president of the board. Between them, they'd run the HOA like a small kingdom for the last 8 years, approving paint colors, measuring grass height with rulers, sending certified letters over holiday decorations that stayed up 2 days past January 6th. That evening, as I sat on the back porch with a glass of sweet tea, watching fireflies blink over the lawn, I told my wife, Ellen, what had happened. She laughed at first, actually laughed out loud, until she saw the look on my face. "They can't be serious," she said. I showed her the email that had already arrived from the board, a formal violation notice claiming the well constituted an unauthorized shared resource extraction and assessing a $100 daily fine until I ceased operation. That's when the laughter stopped. The next morning, Margaret was back, this time with Evelyn and the treasurer, Harold Jenkins, all wearing matching navy polo shirts embroidered with the neighborhood logo. They carried a bright red padlock big enough to secure a bank vault. While I watched from the kitchen window, they taped a laminated notice to my fence post declaring the well seized pending compliance review. Harold fumbled the tape twice, and the notice flapped in the breeze like a surrender flag, but their expressions were deadly serious. I walked out and asked, politely, what legal authority they thought they had to touch private utilities on private property. Evelyn smiled that thin, tight smile she always used when delivering bad news and quoted some rule number about community resources. I pointed out that the rule in question specifically applied only to properties platted after 1998. Ours was recorded in 1976. She just flipped her hair and said, "Rules evolve with community needs." They left the padlock dangling from the gate as a threat and a stack of papers on my driveway detailing escalating fines. That's when I picked up the phone and called the non-emergency line for the sheriff's office. The deputy who responded was a no-nonsense veteran named Rodriguez. He listened to both sides, me with my deed, well permit, and county records, Margaret waving her binder like it was the Constitution. After 10 minutes of review, he looked straight at her and said, "Ma'am, this is private property with a legally registered private water system. The HOA has no jurisdiction here. If you attempt to interfere with it again, lock it, shut it off, anything. You could be looking at criminal charges. You could have heard a pin drop. Margaret's mouth opened and closed a few times, but nothing came out. For the first time in years, she had no comeback. She stormed off muttering about taking it higher, to the State Environmental Division, if necessary. And she did. Within days, I received official notice of a complaint alleging possible groundwater contamination and unauthorized withdrawal affecting the local aquifer. It was nonsense. My well had passed every voluntary test I'd ever paid for, but state agencies have to investigate. What Margaret didn't realize was that Georgia takes private water rights seriously, especially older wells predating municipal expansion. When the state inspectors finally arrived, 2 engineers in bright safety vests, they spent a full day testing flow rate, water quality, pump condition, everything. Their verdict? The well was in outstanding shape. High capacity, excellent purity, no contaminants. Better than many city connections, they said. And because it predated the subdivision, it qualified for designation as a private utility, fully exempt from HOA control and protected under state law. Margaret was there the whole time, hovering at the property line, shouting questions and accusations. When the lead inspector explained the potential private utility status, her face went from red to pale in seconds. She started stammering about fairness and community standards, but the inspector just handed her a card and suggested she direct further concerns to the state legal department. That should have been the end of it. But Margaret doesn't quit. Over the next weeks, things got downright bizarre. Motion-activated cameras I installed caught her and Harold sneaking into my backyard at dusk, whispering about finding the breaker box. The siren and floodlights sent them running. Margaret actually tripped over a garden hose and landed in my azaleas, later claiming whiplash and threatening to sue. Another night, different board members showed up with bolt cutters. I announced over the outdoor speaker that law enforcement was already en route. They scattered like roaches when the lights hit. The HOA kept sending certified letters with new emergency rules passed in closed sessions by 3 votes. Theirs. Fines piled up into the thousands. They even held a driveway rally with a borrowed megaphone, warning neighbors I was planning to charge exorbitant rates once I monopolized the water supply. But people were starting to see through it. A few came to me privately, complaining about rising city water bills and low pressure. They asked, quietly, if my water really was better. Word spread that the state was leaning toward full private utility certification. The final showdown came at the state hearing in late September. Margaret and her entire board showed up in force. Binders, laminated exhibits, even matching folders. I brought my original deed, well logs, county plat maps, and a thumb drive full of security footage. The compliance officer reviewed everything methodically. When the sabotage videos played, grainy night vision of board members prying at the control panel, you could feel the air leave the room. Margaret tried interrupting, claiming public safety concerns, but the officer shut her down firmly. HOAs, he explained slowly, are private agreements among homeowners. They cannot override prior property rights or state-regulated utilities. The ruling was unequivocal. My well was officially registered as a private utility, permanently exempt from HOA jurisdiction. Any further interference would trigger state enforcement action against the association itself. And, sweetest part, they ordered the HOA to reimburse me for all reasonable expenses caused by their actions, attorney consultations, security upgrades, even the cost of attending the hearing. Margaret looked like someone had pulled the plug on her entire worldview. Outside the building, neighbors I'd barely spoken to in years came up to shake my hand. One said, "We've been putting up with her nonsense for too long." Another admitted she'd always been afraid to speak up. Back home, the dam broke. People started sharing stories. $500 fines for basketball hoops, threats over unapproved mailbox planters, kids scolded for chalk art on the sidewalk. A grassroots meeting was called, not by the board, but by residents. Over 70 households showed up on a Saturday evening. Votes were taken right there on the street. Margaret, Evelyn, Harold, all removed by overwhelming majority. A new board was elected on the spot, promising transparency and common sense. The irony came full circle a month later when the city announced scheduled maintenance that would reduce pressure neighborhood-wide for 2 weeks. The new president, A retired school principal named Tom Ruiz knocked on my door, hat in hand. He asked if I'd consider temporary supplemental supply for anyone who wanted it, with fair metering and cost sharing. I agreed. We ran metered lines to 8 homes whose pressure had always been weak. Lawns stayed green. People brought over peach cobbler, homemade jam, offers to help with yard work. It felt good. Real community, not the forced version Margaret had peddled. Margaret watched it all from her front window. She tried one last outburst, storming over yelling about collusion. But Tom calmly reminded her she was trespassing and that the sheriff was on speed dial. For the first time, she backed down. These days, the neighborhood feels different. Kids play basketball without fear of violation notices. Holiday lights stay up until Valentine's if folks want. And my well hums along, doing what it's done for 50 years, providing clean water to whoever needs it on fair terms. Margaret still lives across the street. Some mornings I see her on her porch, staring at my pump house like it personally betrayed her. But her clipboard stays inside now. The power she mistook for authority is gone, replaced by something stronger. Actual respect earned through standing firm on what's right. Looking back, I realized that old well gave us more than water. It reminded everyone that rights worth having are worth defending, and that when one person stands up to overreach, it can free a whole community. So tell me, have you ever had to draw a line with an HOA or a neighbor who thought rules trumped basic property rights? Did you fight or find another way? And bigger picture, when someone abuses power like Margaret did, do they deserve a second chance? Or is accountability the only thing that keeps things civil? I'm genuinely curious where you come down on this. Drop your thoughts below. I read every comment.